the plant pot that raises ghosts. When my grandmother passed away, she left me 3 potted plants and told me to take good care of them. During a video call with my boyfriend, he saw the potted plants behind me and immediately turned pale. "You should get rid of those 3 golden pothos. Haven't you heard that a golden pothos can have 7 spirits?" I turned to look at the golden pothos. Who still believes in that? These were left by my grandmother, and I've taken care of them for a long time. There are 3 spirits living in those potted plants of yours. Taedyung and I were both born with yin-yang eyes. When we first met, it was because of this shared trait, and it moved me to tears. Unlike me, he was a descendant of celestial masters. Even when ghosts passed by him quietly, he could remain calm, acting as if he didn't see them. But I was still the kind of person whose hair stood on end, silently reciting the core values of socialism in an attempt to steady myself. One night, I was followed home by a malevolent ghost, and in fear, I jumped straight into Taedyung's arms. He was slightly surprised, but held me gently. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." It was the first time I had ever felt a sense of peace. Before meeting him, I lived every day in constant fear. After we got together, he gifted me a protective necklace, and from that moment, I stopped seeing those strange entities. I could finally live like a normal person. But the good times didn't last. One day, my grandmother fell at the market, hitting her head. Even though we rushed her to the hospital, her consciousness began to fade. Every night, she would sit on her bed, staring at the wardrobe, saying that a woman in red was hiding inside. I was on the verge of a breakdown. My grandmother used to be a respected shaman in the village, known for being able to see certain things. Although I couldn't see the woman in red that she mentioned, the look in her eyes made me believe she truly saw something. I asked Taedyung to come over and help exorcise whatever was in the house. As soon as he stepped inside, his brows furrowed tightly. "Something's wrong in here." When my grandmother saw him, she suddenly gasped for breath and screamed hoarsely, pointing her wrinkled finger at him. "Get out! You're not allowed in my house. Get out!" Taedyung stepped outside, his expression serious as he looked at me. "Your grandmother is possessed by an evil spirit. You need to move out immediately, or you'll be the next one possessed." "If I move out, what will happen to my grandmother?" Though she had always treated me coldly and yelled at me, she was the one who raised me all these years after finding me abandoned in a cornfield. Taedyung took a deep breath, placed both hands on my shoulders, and looked me straight in the eye, speaking solemnly. "Don't you understand yet? She's no longer your grandmother." I stood frozen, utterly bewildered. Taedyung, noticing my hesitation, continued, "If you don't believe me, you can take off your protective necklace. You'll see some things, but you'll need to prepare yourself mentally." I hesitated for a moment, but in the end, I removed the necklace. In an instant, the world around me became incredibly dark, even the walls appeared mottled and ancient. The malevolent energy surrounding me was much thicker than I had anticipated. Though I'd had yin-yang eyes since birth, I'd only ever witnessed such intense malevolence warping the real world once before. That time, it was a house where the owner had been dismembered by her husband and in-laws. As soon as I stepped inside, the aura had enveloped me. Blood dripped from the ceiling, and countless bloody handprints appeared on the walls. And now, that same terrifying feeling returned. I struggled to breathe, my chest tightening, but Taedyung grasped my hand, looking down at me. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." I slowly pushed open the door, and what I saw left me standing still, completely stunned. The afternoon sunlight streamed in through the window, casting a warm glow over my grandmother's silver-white hair. She had her back to me, standing in the kitchen, cooking food. When I was little, I had dreamed countless times of such a cozy scene. Though there was no terrifying apparition as I had expected, the warmth of the moment felt disturbingly abnormal. Hearing the noise, my grandmother turned to look at me, adopting her usual scolding tone. hands on her hips. What time is it, Tam Tin Lone? Can't you come home earlier to help with the cooking? All you do is wait for the food. The stone weighing on my heart lifted a little. My grandmother was still my grandmother. She glanced at Taedyung and said, "Oh, Taedyung is here too? Stay for dinner." I rushed over and observed her closely. "Grandma, what about your injury?" "I'm not dying just yet. My head injury allowed those filthy things to blind me for a bit, but now I'm fine." Lucky for me, this old lady still has some spiritual power left. I tugged on Taedyung's sleeve and whispered, "It's her." "It's really Grandma." Taedyung furrowed his brow, glancing around cautiously. Once he confirmed there was nothing amiss, he sat down for dinner. After the meal, I walked Taedyung downstairs. His face still showed traces of concern. "Are you sure you won't come stay with me?" "No, I think I should stay and take care of Grandma since she's just recovered." I smiled and pulled out the protective talisman he'd given me from my pocket. "Besides, you've given me this talisman. I'll be fine." "All right, but remember, keep the talisman under your pillow even when you sleep." "I know." Taedyung lowered his gaze, sighed, and then wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me into a hug. "Tin Lone, I won't let anything happen to you." I tilted my face, wrapping my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and planted a soft kiss on his warm lips. "I know. That's why I'm not scared at all." A faint blush spread across Taedyung's cheeks, and he smiled, his lips curving upward. "Next time you kiss me, can you make it last a little longer?" "We'll see how I'm feeling." I laughed as I walked away, waving to him. "Text me when you get home." The light in the hallway had been broken for who knows how long, so I used my phone's light to find my way back to the apartment door. When I opened the door, the house was pitch black. Grandma stood by the window, her frail figure resembling a thin coat rack. "Grandma? Why didn't you turn on the lights?" "Old people like me have poor eyesight. The living room lights are too bright, they hurt my eyes." "Well, you should rest early." Just as I was about to turn and head to my room, Grandma suddenly screamed and grabbed onto me, "Tam Tin Lone." She moved closer, and her haggard face startled me. "You must stay away from Taedyung. He's not human." My grandmother used to like Taedyung a lot. She always disapproved of me socializing with others, let alone dating. "Tam Tin Lone, if you dare to date someone, I'll break your legs," she used to say. But when she found out that I was dating Taedyung, she didn't oppose it at all. Tonight, however, she was acting strangely. Why did she suddenly tell me to stay away from Taedyung? I gently patted her back to comfort her. "Grandma, are you having a headache again?" Whenever she had a headache, she would start speaking incoherently, almost like she was possessed. Suddenly, she clutched her head and collapsed onto the sofa in pain. "My head hurts so much." "I'll get your medicine." I rushed to her room to find the headache medication the doctor had prescribed. As I pushed open her bedroom door, a chilling gust of energy hit me in the face. I looked up and saw a shrine set up in the corner, with flickering white candles. On the altar was a photo of me. The walls around it were covered in talismans for prolonging life. At that moment, a cold chill ran down my spine. I'd read about these talismans in my grandmother's old spiritual books. They were used to transfer someone's lifespan to another person, essentially prolonging the recipient's life. My grandmother was already nearing the end of her life. Could she be trying to use my lifespan to extend hers? Panicked and terrified, I turned around, only to find my grandmother standing by the door, a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Did you find the medicine?" Frightened, I pulled out the protective talisman Taedyung had given me, my voice trembling. "Don't come any closer, Grandma." The smile on her face vanished instantly. Tam Tin Lone, how dare you treat my room like some evil lair? Her eyes reddened with fury as blood began to flow from them. Her voice became raspy and unclear, and her already frail body hunched over even more, bones creaking as if they would break. Her body contorted in a twisted position as she cursed me angrily, staggering toward me. Just as her shriveled hand was about to reach me, I quickly pressed the protective talisman against her forehead. A piercing scream echoed through the house, and the space around us began to distort violently. I bolted out of the house as fast as I could. It wasn't until I reached the crowded, bustling streets and could feel the warmth of being around people that I stopped running, breathless, and called to Dung. Hello, to Dung, I know, I sensed you were in danger. I'm downstairs at your place. Something's happened. Come back quickly. Though still terrified, I mustered the courage to return to the building. But when I arrived, there was already a large crowd gathered outside. The flashing lights of ambulances and police cars filled me with an overwhelming sense of dread. Aunt Wang, our neighbor, spotted me and rushed over. Oh dear! Where have you been? Your grandmother passed away at home, and no one even knew. I went over to bring her some fried rice cakes, and when I saw your door unlocked, I went in to check. That's when I found her. She wasn't breathing. I called the police right away. My mind went completely blank, and just as I was about to faint, strong arms caught me. Dung looked at me with concern. Are you all right? I shook my head, my voice breaking as I struggled to speak. It's my fault. I killed her. It wasn't you, he said softly. Your grandmother passed away before you even came back from seeing me. Dung's words were confirmed to be true by the police. By the time I went downstairs to see him off, my grandmother had already passed away. Since I had forgotten to put on my necklace after returning home, what I saw was the world as perceived through my yin-yang eyes. It was my grandmother's spirit. Did I accidentally make her spirit disappear when I used the protection talisman? I asked. Don't worry, Dung reassured me. The talisman I gave you only seals malevolent spirits. If her spirit didn't have any ill intentions toward you, it wouldn't have been harmed. But if she did, then... He trailed off, leaving me to understand the unspoken truth. I clutched the necklace around my throat, and I told him about the altar and the life-extending talismans I had seen. His face turned serious. She must have intended to use the life-extending talismans on you, but her body couldn't handle the power of the spells, and she died from a brain hemorrhage. Luckily, I almost lost you. I suddenly remembered when my grandmother was hospitalized after her injury. I had taken care of her, and one time, she grabbed my hand and looked at me with a fierce glare. Tam Tin Lone, deep down you must be wishing for me to die soon, don't you? You must be so tired of taking care of this old lady every day. I sighed, feeding her some porridge. Can you stop talking about death all the time? Didn't you once say that you'd live to be 200 years old? You've still got a long life ahead of you. She knocked the bowl of porridge out of my hands and shouted, I'm not eating. Who knows if there's poison in there? The hot porridge scalded the back of my hand, and though my hand was trembling from the pain, she only looked at me with cold indifference. Who are you putting on this show of grievance for? I raised you, fed you until you grew up like this. Whatever I do to you isn't too much. Got it? I silently cleaned up the broken bowl on the floor. I had grown accustomed to such outbursts, having endured them countless times throughout my life. My grandmother was a deeply unstable person. When she was in a good mood, she would stroke my smooth skin and gaze at me with bright eyes. When I was young, I looked just like you. But when her madness took over, she wanted me dead. I should have never brought you back from that cornfield. You're the one who ruined my life. I sat crying by her bed, and for the first time, I raised my voice at her. If you don't want this life, then just take mine. After hearing my words, my grandmother suddenly calmed down. She reached out and wiped the tears from my face. She nodded in satisfaction, a chilling smile forming on her lips. That's a good idea. You're such a dutiful, obedient child. Had she been thinking about using the life-extending talisman on me since then? After all, I was just an orphan child she had found abandoned in a cornfield. Although most of the feelings I had toward my grandmother growing up were fear, her sudden passing still filled me with immense sorrow. The grief crept slowly from the depths of my heart, spreading through my entire body and mind. From now on, this house would only have me left. After helping me arrange my grandmother's funeral, Tadum got busy preparing for his seclusion training. Once the previous celestial master retired, he would be the successor. Life seemed to be gradually returning to normal, and those strange and eerie worlds started to drift further away from me. As soon as Tadum finished his training, he video called me. It had been a while since we last met, and it seemed like he had lost some weight. Why do you look so thin? I asked. Probably because the recent spell practice backfired a bit. I've lost my appetite, but don't worry, I'll be fine after some time, he said, smiling at me with warmth in his eyes that was impossible to hide. You've lost weight too. Once I'm done with training, I'll take you out for some delicious food. But when he caught sight of the potted plants behind me, his face suddenly paled. Get rid of those 3 devil's ivy plants immediately. Haven't you heard the saying, 1 devil's ivy, 7 spirits? I turned to look at the plants. Who still believes that? These were left by my grandmother. She took care of them for a long time. There are 3 vengeful spirits attached to those plants, he said, his expression serious. Seeing the concern on his face made me feel uneasy. When she was alive, my grandmother loved tending to those plants and strictly ordered me to take good care of them. When I was little, I accidentally broke one of the pots, and she screamed furiously.
Oh no.
You've hurt my darling. Her distressed expression and the way she gingerly cradled the pot, her hands trembling unconsciously, was exactly like she was comforting a crying infant. Now, linking that memory to what Tadum just said, I felt a chill creep up my spine. At that moment, I noticed through the video call that the devil's ivy behind me began to sway, accompanied by eerie, sinister laughter. The plant turned, revealing a ghostly, pale face peeking out from the dirt. The head tilted slightly, sliding off the table. With a dull thud, the head hit the ground, its blood-red eyes spinning 360 degrees. It grinned wickedly and said, "Where's my body? Did you hide it?" I panicked, dropping my phone to the floor as Tadum's worried voice echoed from it. "Tin Lone. Put on the high ton robe I gave you last time. I'm coming right now." Frantically, I half ran, half crawled to my grandmother's room, slamming the door shut behind me. I hurriedly turned the ghost-repelling mirror in her room towards the door. Tadum had gifted me the high ton robe on my birthday, but I had thought it was ugly and handed it over to my grandmother. Rushing to the wardrobe, I yanked open the doors, still filled with my grandmother's clothes. I began tossing things aside, searching desperately. Outside the door, the voice of the headless boy ghost changed to a sweet, coaxing tone. To anyone unaware of the situation, it might have sounded like a lost child. "Sister, I'm so scared out here all alone. Could you come and keep me company?" I didn't have time to respond. I spotted the high ton robe, hanging neatly next to the wardrobe. As I pulled the robe down, I noticed a woman dressed in red, her body twisted into an unnatural position inside the wardrobe. Suddenly, her head jerked around, revealing a pale, scarred face as she leaned in towards me. Terrified, I stumbled back several steps, collapsing onto the floor. Trembling, I quickly wrapped the robe around myself, my hands shaking uncontrollably. If you have any grudges, settle them with those who wronged you. I've done nothing to you, please don't hurt me. Ha! The red-clad ghost crawled out of the wardrobe, her body contorting as she approached me. Your body is so full of life. If I could come back to life using your body, I could reunite with my husband, she said, her voice eerily calm. As she spoke, the scars on her face began to heal, revealing a stunning beauty that could captivate anyone, if not for her twisted limbs. If she moved normally, even I might have been mesmerized by her appearance. I suddenly recalled a story my grandmother once told me. This woman must be a masked ghost, capable of changing her appearance at will. The masked ghost blew softly, and the door to the room was thrown open by a powerful gust of wind. Standing outside the door, the headless boy ghost had reattached his head, now holding a leather ball in his arms. He tilted his head and grinned at me. Big sister, you should just give me your body. I was only 6 years old when I was abused to death. I still have so many regrets about this world. The high-ton robe I was wearing seemed to deter the headless boy ghost from attacking directly, but the masked ghost continued her slow, steady approach. It was clear that the robe had little effect on her. That high-ton robe of yours is so ugly. Why don't you take it off and throw it away, she said mockingly, her limbs skittering across the floor like a spider's, yet she moved swiftly and gracefully. The sight of her made my scalp tingle with terror. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the door. As I passed the headless boy ghost, I flung the high-ton robe over his head. Immediately, white smoke began to rise from the robe. The boy ghost let out a piercing scream, so loud it felt like it might rupture my eardrums. Kill her. Kill her. Kill. 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 Just as I flung the door open, I collided with a warm embrace. Reflexively, I tried to pull away, but strong arms wrapped tightly around me. Tejung held me close, his calm, steady voice, always reassuring, rang out. Tin Lone, it's me. Seeing Tejung appear, my heart, which had been racing with fear, settled down a little. Tejung glanced behind me, his expression growing cold and filled with a murderous intent. Oh, the descendant of the celestial master has arrived. I've heard a lot about you, the masked ghost said, crawling on the living room floor, twisting her body and smiling seductively. The headless boy ghost had pulled the high-ton robe from his head, revealing burns covering his head, which were gradually healing. Tejung pulled out a talisman, and a golden light erupted from the array in the center, illuminating the entire hallway. Bright rays emitted from the talisman, like lightning striking at the two ghosts before us. The masked ghost immediately stood up, her long hair lifting as if a peacock had spread its tail, unable to suppress her rage as she let out a terrifying scream, her mouth stretching wide, almost to her ears. The sight of her gaping mouth sent chills down my spine, making me feel faint. She then crouched low, her body clinging to the ceiling, before launching toward us at breakneck speed, like a giant spider. Tejung pushed me back, stepping forward with the talisman. Instantly, the hallway was filled with an oppressive energy, turning desolate and frightening. Our neighbor, Aunt Wang, swung open her door, fuming, "What time is it, making such a racket? Can't you let people sleep?" Her face turned pale in an instant, disbelief washing over her as she rubbed her eyes and quickly shut the door, mumbling, "It's all my fault, I shouldn't have opened the door." Amit Ba. At that moment, a blood-curdling scream rang out behind me. The masked ghost and the headless boy were being suppressed by the talisman's power, the long hair of the masked ghost whipping around as she yelled, "Boss! Someone's capturing me!" Whether it was an illusion or not, the air around us suddenly turned icy, the distorted space becoming even darker. My heart tightened as I felt a shroud of darkness enveloping me, the despair of impending death creeping closer. Knock! Knock. Knock. Heavy footsteps approached, and I suddenly remembered Taedyung saying, in that flower pot, there are 3 spirits. So, the strongest spirit had been lurking behind us all along. Taedyung's face darkened. It's the war god. A chill washed over me. I had heard my grandmother mention that the war god was a legendary ancestor of zombies, a bloodthirsty fiend. My first reaction was that we were doomed. When the war god emerged from behind the door, his towering figure stood around 2 meters tall. I couldn't fathom how such a being had hidden in my home. His long hair flowed wildly, obscuring his face, but I could still see his jade-green eyes and his skin stretched tight over his gaunt frame. The muscles across his body were defined, giving the impression that he could easily kick me into orbit with a single blow. Taedyung took a step back and then pushed me behind him. Go now. I froze for a second as Taedyung pressed the elevator button, shoving me inside. The moment the elevator doors closed, I saw the hallway flash with a green light, then heard the sound of Taedyung's scream being cut off, followed by a choked, agonizing cry, I couldn't run. One thought consumed me, Taedyung was enduring this for me, he would die alone at the hands of the spirits, and the thought of that filled me with despair. My legs trembled as I quickly hit the stop button for the elevator on the ground floor and ran up the stairs. When I reached home, I saw the war god gripping Taedyung by the throat, lifting him off the ground. He looked as if he were hanging by a thread. Let him go. What do you want? Just come after me. The war god dropped Taedyung, turning his attention toward me. Taedyung fell heavily to the ground, gasping for breath as he looked at me with a sorrowful expression. Why did you come back? The masked ghost twisted her body and cackled, stop the act. There's no such thing as loyalty among people willing to die for each other, it's all a lie. Especially with men, you can't trust them. The war god approached me, extending his hand in my direction. In an instant, a golden light flashed, and an immense force yanked me towards the balcony. As I looked down at the ground 6 floors below, my heart leaped into my throat, but just as quickly, before I could fully comprehend the fall, I landed on the ground. Taedyung, disheveled and battered, grabbed me and opened the door of a taxi parked nearby, shoving me inside. The taxi driver turned his head, slightly surprised. What kind of accident was it that you're in this state? Going to the hospital? Taedyung looked up, Lin and Temple, Mount Q die. The driver seemed about to say more, but I stuffed a few $100 bills into his hands. Please, just drive. The car sped into the mountainous area, finally arriving at the entrance of Lin and Temple. I didn't ask Taedyung why we were here, but I had absolute faith in him. After all, he was the only one willing to sacrifice his life to protect me. Strangely enough, everyone said that the incense at Lin and Temple was never extinguished. Even at midnight, devout pilgrims would come to offer prayers. But Lin and Temple was eerily quiet at that moment. I helped Taedyung inside and was about to call for help when he pulled me back. I turned my head to find him smiling a smile that was both unfamiliar and frightening. Luring you here wasn't easy. In Taedyung's eyes was a kind of desire to eat my heart and swallow my life. This was the first time I saw him with such a terrifying expression directed at me. I hesitated slightly, looking at him. Taedyung? He smirked, his handsome, pale face turning even more ashen, and he leaned closer to me, emanating a stench that was suffocating. Didn't you say your heart belongs to me? Now it's time for you to fulfill your promise. His gaze shifted down, and he licked his lips. I can't wait any longer, I want to taste it. Taedyung's eyes suddenly took on a greenish hue, his teeth turning sharp and menacing. A voice suddenly urged me, run. You scum. You pig. Playing with someone's feelings. Taedyung froze for a moment, and I seized the chance to break free from his grip, turning and running out of the temple. If I still believed in love, then I must be a dog. When I was drunk, I used to say some sappy, lovey-dovey things, but my heart spoke of love, while he really wanted to eat my heart. Bursting out of the temple, I saw the taxi still parked there, and I immediately opened the door and got inside. Driver, go quickly. Anywhere is fine. As soon as I turned my head to look, I found the driver had been drained dry, turning into a dry corpse right there. Looking up, I saw Taedyung had chased me to the temple door, and I hurriedly got out of the car and ran into the deep forest, feeling desperate and anxious from all sides. At this point, I could only rip off the necklace Taedyung gave me. In that moment, my yin-yang eyes opened, allowing me to fully see hundreds of spirits wreaking havoc in the spirit realm. The graveyard was indeed the predecessor of the temple. Linen Temple was built to suppress the vengeful spirits in the graveyard. Looking up, I even saw spirits dressed in jewelry from the Ming dynasty and corpses in Qing dynasty clothes jumping around in front of me. Fortunately, they were not as terrifying as Taedyung wanting to eat my heart or the three spirits. I cleared my throat and shouted, "Anyone who has something to do in the human realm, I will do it. As long as you can help me stop the spirits, I will burn paper and incense for you every Qingming festival." A corpse jumped in front of me, tilting its head to look at me. "What is a villa?" A hanging ghost with long hair stuck out its tongue and smiled. "You country bumpkin, you don't even know what a villa is. It's a very big house that modern people live in, even bigger than the houses in our village." I was truly dumbfounded. They were still discussing? "Could you please look at me and save me first? Don't make noise, this is a matter of life and death. If you wait too long and someone dies, who will burn paper for you?" An old rich man wearing an official's hat and leaning on a cane approached me, his face greenish-blue, evidently poisoned to death by someone. He looked up at me. "The three spirits from your house are chasing you here, but the one in Linen Temple is the most terrifying. It can command hundreds of spirits." My whole body went numb. So, what should I do? The rich man counted on his fingers, shaking his head. "You are originally a cursed being. Every aspect of your fate is full of disaster. I advise you to jump into the river to avoid being torn apart by the spirits. It's better than dying in a humiliating way." The surrounding spirits also nodded in agreement with the rich man's words, looking dazed. "Indeed, we can't do anything against those spirits. Facing them will result in our souls dispersing. You can only take care of yourself." Suddenly, the old corpse frowned, looking terrified. "The Tuongnan. I smell death. The Tuongnan is coming here." I was truly grateful. But nothing was more unsettling than this moment. Because ignoring the hundreds of spirits in the graveyard, I caught sight of three spirits carrying a thick aura of decay slowly approaching me. Just like in a horror movie, 1 second they were over 100 meters away, and the next second they were only 10 meters away. In the next second, they bared their fangs and